So let's talk a little bit about social influences in buyer behavior. We've been talking about individual differences. Let's talk about those things that are outside of the individual. Social influences include personal friends, reference groups, opinion leaders, family influences, social class, and culture and subculture. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about these. Well, first let's talk about reference groups, because reference groups include friendship groups, membership groups, aspiration groups, and disassociative groups. You know that your friends are a huge influence on your buying behavior. It's demonstrated over and over again that your friends will have a major impact on not only whether or not you own a product in a category, but which brand you might buy in that category. So your friends are a very important social influence on your buying behavior. There's also groups that are called membership groups. These are groups that you're a member of. So you're a member of the Boy Scouts, or you're a member of a club or organization, or you're a member of a sorority or fraternity, or you're a member of the UNLV soccer team. All right. These membership groups also have a great social influence on you, not only, once again, in terms of whether or not you buy in a particular category, but also then which brands that you buy. Another kind of group is called an aspiration group. This is not a group that you are a member of, but it is a group that you would like to become a member of. And so you tend to look at the people who are in that reference group and what they buy and what they and their consumer behavior patterns, and you tend to act the same way. This is a little bit like, for instance, if you're a little leaguer and Bryce Harper wears two batting gloves, then when you play baseball, you want to wear two batting gloves. This is also the notion that that some group that you would like to become a member of performs a particular sort of buying behavior pattern. Well, you want to do the same thing. And this is, of course, the idea of doing what you think people in that aspiration group would expect you to do. The final group is called disassociative groups. This is just the opposite of an aspiration group. This is a group of individuals that you want to make sure that no one thinks that you're part of. So if they buy A, then you won't buy A. Or if they do this process B, you won't do that process B. So these are groups of people who you make sure that you don't do anything that they do, so that no one confuses you with being part of that group. Another social influence, of course, are opinion leaders, and of course, this has to do with word of mouth. This is a dramatically changing area, and it's all about social networks. If you think about it, think about the new social networks on the internet are all about being social influences, opinion leaders, and spreading word of mouth. Some examples, of course, are Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, TripAdvisor, Amazon, Yelp, Rate My Professor, etc. But even though we're going to talk about this, understand that personal opinion leaders, that is friends, co-workers, or your guy, still have the greatest influence. Well, once again, now, who's your guy? Well, for instance, I have a rock guy. So if anybody has a rock question, I always send them to Dave, my rock guy. Many of you have a guy. It's not gender specific. It's my guy that if you want to buy a color TV, or this is the guy that knows all about that. Types of opinion leaders: endorsers, spokespersons, people who provide testimonials, reviewers, critics, mavens, and experts. Characteristics of opinion leaders: whose opinion do you seek out? Well, people who are knowledgeable and have expertise. People who appear to be independent, that is, they don't have a vested interest in what you buy. This is the problem that you have when you go to a store and you talk to a salesperson. You know that the salesperson gets more commission or less commission based on what you buy, and so they're not independent. They have a vested interest in the process. You tend to want opinion leaders who you believe are credible. It would be nice if they were people who you're familiar with and that you liked. And of course, part of the idea behind opinion leaders is this value of numbers. So while I can get an opinion from someone, if I go up to a rating site like TripAdvisor or Yelp or Amazon, then I can get more than one person's opinions, and I can look at the summary of opinions and reviews. There are family influences. Family influences you both as a socialization agent and in your roles. And of course, there is a great influence of children on family decision making. Here we have some information that we talked about just very shortly earlier on. This is that family cycle stage. When you're newly married with no children, your purchase behavior is much different than when you start to have children. Many parents put their children first and are willing to go without certain things to make sure that their children have all the things that they need to be successful. In terms of the family life cycle, the young family life cycles are single, married with children, without children, married with children, divorced with children, and then middle age. You run into a number of different things, and then older married, older unmarried, and of course then sole survivors. Some family influences. Well, family decision making includes two sorts of family types of decisions. One is a decision that is spouse dominant. Now, in some cases, it might be the male deciding on new tires for the car, or it might be the spouse deciding on who you're going to be using for your dentist. And so the argument is that certain kinds of decisions in most households, one spouse or the other takes the dominant role. But many decisions are sort of joint decisions. Maybe buying a new car is a joint decision in your house because everybody involved is going to have to use it. And of course, if you have children, the question is, what are the role of the children in making those decisions? So when we think about family influences and family roles, understand that in a family decision-making situation, there are at least 5 different roles. There is the person who is the initiator of the decision, and typically then also maybe the information gatherer. There are influencers. These are people who influence the decision by either making their opinions or attitudes known or by whining and complaining. Then there's eventually the decision maker. That is the person who has to make the decision at the end of the day. There's the individual that's the purchaser and the individual that's the user. Let me give you an example, okay? We're getting ready to go to California. We all get in a car. We start heading for California. We get down to Flamingo, and there's a big McDonald's sign there. And so immediately someone in the back seat, one of the children say, let's stop for McDonald's before we leave. Now you're driving a car and you're thinking to yourself, well, I would at least like to get to California before we make our first stop. Maybe at least as far as Barstow. But someone has already initiated the idea of stopping for food before we leave town. Now everybody else becomes an influencer. All the other brothers and sisters chime in. Let's stop. Let's stop. And even your spouse will jump in and make a suggestion. But because you're driving the automobile, it turns out that you're the ultimate decision maker because you've got your hands on the steering wheel. But however it happens, when you do finally stop for food, there is someone who has to pay the bill. That's the purchaser. And then whoever ordered food, they are the users of that food. Now, one of the funny things about family influences and buying behavior is that while you don't want to admit it, you are turning into your parents as a purchaser. All the data shows that your family influences your buying behavior well past the point of you being a child. And so even as you get a little older now, you should be making purchase decisions. You will notice that you're making purchase decisions and you'll think to yourself, that sounds just like my mom, or that sounds just like my father. So understand that the family has great influence on how you become a purchaser, and then later on what kinds of purchasing decision making you use. Another influence, a social influencer, is something called social class. Social class starts out with lower class, middle class, and upper class. The U.S., I have a little picture here of something that's a little bit different than that. This is the idea that you start as a lower class, and then there's lower middle class, upper middle class, lower upper class, super upper class, all those sorts of things. And so there are all kinds of ways to do social class. So think about social class and ask yourself, how influential is social class in purchasing decisions? Now, first understand that the number one predictor of what social class you are in turns out to be education rather than income. All right. So the most important predictor of social class then is education, not income. So what kind of influence does social class have on buyer behavior? Well, in some cases, it probably has a great influence on what schools you think you should attend, what stores that you might shop at. But also understand that social class, the influence of social class is much greater in general on the East Coast than it is as you move further west. As you move further west, there's more of a breakdown of the social class, and not too many decisions are made based on social class. It's much more likely to be made on income and factors like that instead. There are also called social cultural influences, that is cultural influences and subcultural influences. Your book talks about Hispanic buying patterns, African American buying patterns, and Asian American buying patterns. And it does a nice job of talking about cultural influences. And I think we all sort of understand that. If you don't, go back and reread that section. Talk a little bit about our sort of subcultural influences, okay? And the argument is that while you have overall cultural influences, number of self-cultural influences greatly do impact your buying behavior and your decision making. These include such things as religious groups. If you are of a particular religious persuasion and highly involved in your religion, that probably influences. So will gangs, fraternities, sorority clubs, etc. One of my favorite examples is the UNLV student subculture. I found out not too long ago, talking to a number of students, that there is this subculture of UNLV students. One of the subcultural elements is called the 3-week rule. And since you've been going to school here for a while, I'm sure you all understand the 3-week rule. This is that you go to a class for 3 weeks, and if the person that's teaching the class is simply reading you the textbook in class every day, that is lecturing directly out of the textbook, then you don't have to go to class anymore. You can just show up for the exams. That's all part of the UNLV student subculture. So think about subcultural influences. They're very important.